Hey people, Titus here with another tutorial on working with blueprint classes in Unreal Engine. In this tutorial I'll show you how to construct a custom blueprint class to control a door mesh. We'll be driving this through both collision detection and keyboard input from our player controller. So let's jump right into it and set up our project. I'm going to be using the third person template. Make sure your starter content is checked. Give a name and choose a location, and then we'll go ahead and hit create. We're going to be creating just a traditional house door using the starter content mesh package that's included, and we'll be rotating it along the z-axis. But you can use the same logic for sliding doors as well. You would just modify the transform rather than the rotation. Yeah, so we got our project set up. Let's create some folders here. We'll call one levels and another one for our blueprints. Alright, we're going to then create a new level. I'm going to do a basic type, and then I'm going to save the current level in our level map as level 1. Alright, now let's go into the starter content, and under the props folder, there's two meshes we're going to be using called the door frame and door. So you can drag those out into your viewport. And let's assemble our door. And if you need finer controls, disable snapping, and you can align it just how you need it. That looks pretty good. I'm also going to add a player start. So under the quick add basic, I'll add a player start into the map here. Now you'll notice if you play the map, you're going to be able to run through the door, so we don't want that either. So let's go ahead and we can edit the door mesh, and we can add a simplified box collision. Now after you add it, you'll want to double check that in the collision settings, your complexity is set to project default. If it is, just go ahead and save. And now we shouldn't be able to go through the door. Alternatively, if you did want to do that, you can go into your player controller, modify the collision settings, and add an exception or change the type to ignore it, or block it, so you could do it that way too. Just find that adding a collision is pretty much works just as well, as just as easy, so either way. But yeah, so now that we have our door, we're going to need to drive this logic with the trigger box. So the first one we'll do is when the player walks up to the door, it'll automatically open, and when they leave the vicinity of the door, it'll automatically close. So let's go ahead and set up a quick add under basic trigger box. Drag that out here. I'm then going to scale it along the X and Y, and just make sure there's pretty decent coverage. Once I'm happy with my setup, I'm going to select the door, the frame, and the trigger box, and then you can click the blueprint icon at the top and go to convert the selection to blueprint class. Then you'll want to choose harvest components. We're going to give a name. I'm going to call it B_door, and I'm also going to add collision because we're going to be making two different types of doors. And then I'll select my blueprints folder to place it in there. And there we go. So now let's go ahead and write our code to drive the logic. We can go, well, real quick in the components tab, I'm going to rename some items. Call it trigger. Call this one frame. And this one door. And then under the event graph, I'm going to use the begin overlap. I'm going to drag off my execution pin and do a cast to third person character. Hook up my output other actor into my input object. I'm then going to get a reference to my door by dragging it in. Then I'm going to pull off the door pin and do set relative rotation right here. The rotation I'm going to use on the Z is going to be 90 degrees for an open. And I'll hook up my execution pin. And if I compile and play that, you should notice that it opens and we can go through it. Now let's set up the close. So to do the close functionality, we can just select our trigger option and then right click. You'll have add event for trigger at the top. We can use type collision and then the end overlap. And then we do the same thing. We can just cast to third person character, hook up our other actor output into our object input. And then we can use our same reference to our door and drag set relative rotation. This time we'll set it to 0, and then we'll hook up our execution pins. Compile. And if we play, when we enter, and we close. Pretty basic. But let's go ahead and take it a step further and let's see if we can smooth out that animation with a timeline. So what we'll do here is let's drag this down a bit. And let's drag this over. So on the begin overlap, I'm going to drag off my third person execution pin and search for timeline. Call it my door swing. And then I can compile and double click on the timeline. And this is where you can add various tracks to kind of do smooth animation while you're working with your blueprint nodes and stuff. The same timeline functionality is actually available in widgets too, which I'll probably cover later. And the ones that you can see here, we have color, event. Our door rotation is actually a vector because it has 3 values. But you can also do float. Now, because we're only modifying the Z-axis for the door opening and closing, I'm not going to use a vector. I'm actually just going to use a float, just because it's easier. And then I'm going to give it a name of door rotation. Whatever you name it here is what's going to show up in your event graph as an output pin. So just be aware of that. And our door has 2 states, has open and close. So we're going to need 2 keyframes. So right click, add key, and you can right click, add key. So now we got 2 little markings. Select my first one. I'm going to put it at time 0. I want the value to be 0. And then on my second keyframe, I'm going to do 2 seconds. I want my value to be 90 degrees. If I hit the buttons here, I can frame our graph so you can kind of see it, make sure it looks correct. It does. We can compile, save, and go back to our event graph. So when we execute this timeline, it's doing an update value on the relative rotation, but we'll want to hook up the rotation to the new rotation. But you'll notice the output and input pin colors are different, so I can't use them. But that's okay, because you can right click on your pin and split it, and then we can simply pop it into just the Z, because we don't need to modify the other ones. Alright, so now if I go into the begin overlap, door opens smoothly. If I leave, it'll probably slam shut. So let's fix the closing. We'll actually just delete this node down here because we don't need it. And if we bring this up here, we can plug this into the reverse node, and that'll give us the same functionality that we had before. So now when I go in, and if I leave, the door opens and closes. Pretty straightforward. Alright, but that's if it was based on automatic opening and closing based on where the player is. So if you were looking for something more along the lines of like the player has to press a button on the keyboard or on the controller to actually open a door, or maybe they need to flip a switch, I can show you how to do that too. So what we'll do is we'll go back into our props. We're going to build a second door. And like so. Disable snapping. Line it up how you like it. Alright, now we don't have a nice mesh that can be used for a switch, so I'm going to have to make a crude one. So I'm going to go to my quick add, do a couple shapes. I'll do a cube. And I'm going to scale it on the X and Y and the Z. I think that looks okay. And then I'm going to add another shape. We'll do a sphere. I'm going to scale that by 0.5 in the X, Y, and Z. And I did tell you it was going to be crude. Alright, well that will have to do for now. So the way there's a lot of different ways you can approach this problem. I think I'm going to use a trigger. So when the player's near this switch, that'll be one Boolean check. And then I'll just create a simple keyboard input on the third person character blueprint, because it already has a reference to the player controller, so I think it'll be easier just for demonstrating purpose. But you can kind of do this probably a number of different ways. But for the way I'm going to do it, I am going to need another trigger, so we'll do a quick add under basic. I'm going to do a sphere instead of a box this time, because our object is a sphere. Now you want to make sure that your character can overlap, so when you place it, make sure you get a little bit of room, however big you need it, and you can scale it of course, but I think that'll work for me. So now I'm going to select my cube, my door, my frame, my sphere, and my trigger sphere. And then I'm going to select the blueprint icon, convert selection to blueprint class. I'll do harvest. I'm going to choose my blueprints folder, and I'm going to call it B_door and switch. Alright, so now if we play, I have this door which should block me, which it does, and I have this one still working, so it looks pretty good. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the keyboard logic on the player blueprint side. Because I'm using the third person starter content, it's going to be in the third person folder under blueprints, and then you have your BP third person character. Now normally you would you would set this up in the enhanced input local player system, which is the new with UE5. But just for this demonstration, we're going to make it simple. So I'm just going to do a keyboard input. So what we'll do is we will right click and do keyboard input, and I'm going to use the F key. So we'll get the custom event here. I want to create a variable. I'm just going to call it F key. And I'm going to give it the data type Boolean, so true or false. I'm going to start it with false, of course. I'm going to drag it out, and I'm going to do a set. And then I'm going to drag it out again and do another set F key. One's going to be true, one's going to be false. If I press the F key, it's going to be true. If I release the F key, it's going to switch it back to false. And that is the only code we're going to be doing in the third person. I think that'll pretty much be good enough. If we go back to the switch, we need to drive some logic in here. I'm going to use the, well, let's rename our components. So first thing, I will rename our trigger sphere to switch. Door frame, I'm going to call that just frame. And door, I'll call door. I'll leave the other stuff alone because it's not really that pertinent. Alright, so on our begin overlap, I'm going to drag out and I'm going to do a cast to third person character. Hook up my output other actor into my object input. And now I need to get a reference to the switch, so we'll drag this out here. Actually, no, I don't think I need to do that. No, actually I don't. You can literally, we'll create a variable in here as well, and we'll call it near switch. And then it's going to be a Boolean data type as well. And I will do a set, hook up the execution pin, and I will set it to true. And I'm going to move the tick down a bit. So yeah, so when the actor overlaps, we'll set near switch true. And then we'll want to select our switch, right click, add event for switch. It'll be collision, end overlap. And we'll do the same thing. So we're going to be cast to third person character, hook up the other actor to the object, and we're going to do near switch drag out, and we'll do a set, and we will set it to false. The reason we have to do this in two different Boolean checks is because I don't want the player to be able to open the door from anywhere in the map, so I need another way to check that basically. But these events only fire when the character enters the trigger sphere basically, so it's kind of like a one-time deal, and it only happens when they're there, and it happens very quickly. So in order to drive the switch logic, I'm actually going to want to do that, well, I'm going to do it in the tick event, because the tick runs every frame. So then that logic can double check to make sure that it's, you know, if the player is pushing a button in tick, then it'll actually do something. But yeah, let me show you what that looks like here. So on the event tick, I'm going to drag off and do a cast to third person character. Now normally this would kind of be dead in the water because we have no way to reference tick to our cast. But because this logic is relying on a overlap event, I can steal the reference on the begin overlap and plug it in down here, and that will actually work. If you do the end overlap, you would have to have the player overlap and then leave and then come back, and it would work. So that's why I'm doing it on the begin overlap. So it's I'm kind of cheating basically. Now we need references to our two booleans, which the near switch we can do a get, but in order to get the F key is in a completely different blueprint class. So I want to drag off the cast and search F key so I can do my get. So now I have my two Boolean items that I needed. And then since I need to check them both, I can run a search for and Boolean. And then I can say when both of these are true, I can cast out here and do a branch. Plug this in here. And so basically every frame, check if the F key and if the player is near the switch. If they are, set it to true and run this code. If it's false, run this code. Now there's some problems with doing with tick. You probably don't normally want to do it this way. If I were to do, like say if it was true, I set relative, well actually let's get a reference to our door. Set relative rotation, and I'll set it to 90, and then set it to true. So if I compile, this will probably work fine. Oops. You can see it open there. It's a little bit glitchy because I put my mouse over here. Let me try that again. And that works. Won't close though. If I wanted it to close, you have to get a little creative because we're doing this off the tick function, and kind of like our way our setup is. We can drag off the true pin and do a flip-flop. And then basically if it triggers or it fires, the flip-flop will do A, and then if it fires again, it'll do B, and then if it fires again, it'll do A. Just kind of goes between them. So I can drag off door, do set relative rotation. I'll set it back to 0 and do it like this, so we can at least get the functionality that we're expecting. But there's still a problem with this, and you just saw it there. So tick is every frame, so it's going to be different on every piece of hardware. You know, depending on your GPU, that's how many frames you're spitting out, right? So it's happening very, very fast. So you want a way to control that. Otherwise, you don't want to deal with this. So what we can do instead is after our branch node, we can do a do once. So it's basically going to execute the code only once, and then it will not run it again. Now, if we do it this way, obviously you're going to be able to open the door, but you wouldn't be able to close it, right? Because it only runs once. But you can take the branch on the false condition and set it to reset the do once timer. And then it should give us the behavior that we're looking for. And that's much smoother, because it's basically waiting for a tick to happen before it resets. So it gives your player controller plenty of time to actually push the key and wait for the action. And then yeah, of course, if you want to smooth it out, we can delete this reference here, and we'll just do like we did in the first door. And we can drag off here and create a timeline. Call it door swing. Double click, we'll add a float, we'll add a key, set this to 0 time, 0 value, 2 seconds, set to 90 degrees, looks good. And then what you do is we're gonna split our pin. Oh, you see it says new track 0, so if I go in here and right click, rename, I'll call it door rotation, so it's a little bit cleaner on the code. Door rotation. And then I'll plug that into my Z, and I'll switch my flip-flop onto the B node. I'll do it at the reverse. And that's not too bad. I mean, it's a funky way to do it, but you know, like a lot of different ways to solve a problem. Just kind of go, it works. So you can hit a switch, and you close the door. Oops. Although my close, oh no, my close is working. So the reason it took a while is because the reverse plays the animation from the beginning and then it goes back. So if you did like reverse from end, it would be quicker. But, you know, it's good enough for this example. But yeah, and the same logic can be applied to, you know, if you're doing sliding doors, just rather than do set relative rotation, you can do set relative transform, and then you can move it along an X or a Y. So your doors, you know, if they were sliding apart or maybe they're sliding up, so you can create some pretty basic functionality in your project just for having, you know, doors. Or you can do them, you know, where they're collision based, where when the player walks up, they automatically open. You know, either way. But yeah, just wanted to put a brief tutorial out there and show you that basic functionality. And that's pretty much what you see here. Alright people, that pretty much concludes this tutorial on our custom door blueprint class. I hope you found it informative and it helps you in your own projects. If so, please leave a like and give a comment below on any future topics you want covered on this channel. As always, thanks for watching, see you on the next one, and remember, code is like humor. When you have to explain it, it's bad.